Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakuyo, regular contributor for Buddhistdoor Global, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of The Ordinary Buddhist. The title of today's talk is Eating Strawberries in the Apocalypse. But before we get into that, I'll remind you to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. Also, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. So I'll start today by telling a story. It's a Zen koan that I appreciate quite a bit, and I believe it deals a lot with some things that we're all working through right now. There was a young man who was exiled from his village. In fact, he was chased away from it by an angry mob who were carrying torches and pitchforks, and they had every intent of ripping this man apart if they were to catch him. Now, eventually he was able to escape the mob by running into the forest, but it was getting dark and the forest was filled with wild animals and scary looking trees, so he ran and he ran and he got lost, and eventually, in his confusion, he ran off the side of a cliff. Now, as he was falling, this young man was battered and beaten, his head bashed against the rocks, his limbs torn at by sharp stones, until eventually, on a whim, he was able to grab hold to a tree root that was sticking out of the rock face and stop his fall. But our story doesn't end there, because when he looked down at the bottom of the cliff, he realized that there were a pair of hungry tigers waiting to eat him alive if he were to fall all the way to the bottom. Now, he tried to climb up, but his limbs were so battered, he was so tired from running that he just didn't have the strength. He couldn't climb up, he couldn't go down, so he just hung there and tried to catch his breath. But before he could do that, a mouse climbed out of a crack in the rocks, took one look at him in his predicament, and then started to chew at the base of the tree root that was holding him up. So the man looked at the mouse, looked at the tigers, realized his fate. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a perfectly ripe strawberry. And he took a bite, and it was delicious. The end. Now, I really enjoy that koan because it just sums up the human experience so well. Now, most of us have never been chased by an angry mob or fallen over a cliff, but we all know what it's like to feel hopeless, to live in despair, to have one thing after another, after another, after another attack us from all sides. And right when we think we've dealt with one problem, there's another problem we have to solve. And maybe we can't solve it. What to do? And in this year, in 2020, we're all that way. The West Coast is on fire in a way it's never been before, to the point where the sky where I live was tinged orange and yellow a few days ago, and I live hundreds of miles from the coast. The pandemic and the quarantine orders that were only supposed to last a couple weeks have now been going on for months with no sign of stopping. And there's political unrest all over the country. Some days it honestly feels like the apocalypse, like the world is coming to an end. Metaphorical tigers below us, a mouse chewing at the root that's keeping us safe, an angry mob above us. What to do? Well, in Buddhism, what we're taught to do in situations such as this is to look for the strawberry. Look for the small, tiny, seemingly insignificant thing that can bring us joy and happiness in our times of sorrow. Maybe it's a literal strawberry. Maybe it's time spent with family and friends. Maybe it's cleaning the dishes or making the bed. Maybe it's going for a hike in our favorite park. Now, as human beings, oftentimes we're tempted to think that these little things don't matter in the big picture, that with the entire West Coast on fire, who cares if I go for a hike or if I spend time cuddling with my pets? But in Buddhism, it's quite the opposite. The little things matter more when the big things are in trouble. The strawberry is more delicious if we're about to die. A well-made bed, a clean bathroom are even more enjoyable if there's political unrest in the world. Now's not the time to turn away from these small pleasures, these small joys, these tiny bits of happiness. It's time to turn towards them, to really suck the juice out in the same way we'd suck the juice out of a strawberry. So I'd encourage you to do that. If you feel despair, if you feel hopelessness, reach into your pocket, pull out a piece of fruit, and take a bite. Amitabha.